Hello and welcome to episode 40 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa. And I never imagined when I first started doing these that I was going to get up to 40, although it's taken a few years. And we've got lots of questions, so I suppose I should just wade into it without telling the customary dumb joke. Yoo-hoo. I've never had one before. It's kind of like fake chocolate milk. So, first question is from the Arya Swasti Project. And the Arya Swasti Project says, "Greetings, Panyo. I have been thinking about my next death. Not in a morbid way or anything, but I would hope that with a little practice I could go out peacefully, barring some sort of karmic issue and being taken out in a car wreck or convenience store holdup or something. Is there anything that we can do to prepare ourselves daily for this moment? I've heard that some adept yogis can pick the time and day, that there is a slight shift or shiver in the body when they pass on. On that note, I've heard that there can be anywhere from instant to 49 days from incarnation to incarnation. Can you explain? Warm regards, much respect, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu." And I should add that this question was actually on the list last time, and for some bizarre reason I just skipped over it and didn't see it. So let's just assume that he still wants to know the answer to this question after all this time. So it's kind of a multiple question here. Is there anything that we can do to prepare ourselves daily for this moment? There's one of the meditations in Theravada Buddhism is Marananusati, or recollection of death. It's considered to be one of the great protectors because, as the Arya Swasti Project suggests here, it does help to prepare you for the moment of death, which can arguably be considered the most important moment of your life, because the moment of death kind of sets the bearings for your next incarnation, your next rebirth. So if you die with the good mental states, you're more likely to be at least pointing in a good direction with regard to your next rebirth. And with regard to Marananusati, of the 40 recollections, you can say that at least 11 of them are reflections on death. In Orthodox Buddhist meditation instructions, there are the standard list of 40, and I believe I've done a video on that. 11 of them are with regard to contemplating death. One is Marananusati, as I said, and the other 10 are just reflecting on corpses. And when you're reflecting on a corpse or a skeleton, you're supposed to think to yourself, as is that, so will I be. As I am, so is that. And just reminding yourself that you're going to die every day. Seeing like decrepit old people who are just barely shuffling along, barely getting around. We're moving one step closer to that every moment of our lives, assuming that we live long enough. So just reminding yourself that you're not going to live forever, at least not in the same body, with the same personality and the same name and all that. Although the thing is, if you keep doing something over and over again, you just get used to it and it stops having the effect. Like part of my practice as a monk is, contemplating death, when I was a monk. And so I actually went and observed a couple of autopsies. And, the first time I went into the morgue and saw dead people up close, it was, you had a really strong sense of samvega, it's called in Pali, which is a sense of urgency, just like alarm. It's like, I got to get this done. I got to live a spiritual life, not waste my time on this planet. But, after you keep doing it, then it just kind of wears off. It's like, I had a human skull in Burma that I had sitting there. I had a human skeleton that with all the bones linked together with wires, and I had it sitting in the meditation posture out in front of my cave. And after a while, it's just like a picture on the wall. It's like you just stop noticing it. You know, some filter in your brain just kind of filters it out as background noise. So you may have to innovate every now and then to keep it fresh. But yeah, just remind yourself that you're not going to live forever. And I mean, that is about as good of a recollection of death as as you can get it. I mean, it does seem to be effective, although I haven't died yet this time, so I can't say how well it's going to help me when that time comes. Let's see. He keeps going here. I've heard that some adept yogis can pick the time of day that there's a slight shift or shiver in the body when they pass on. Yeah, there's. I've read mainly stories of like Zen masters, like in like medieval Chinese Zen masters or Chan masters, who one of them just sent out invitations to his death, you know, little cards, because you know just in advance he knew he was going to die at a certain time, and he just gave a little talk and yelled "cuts" or something like that, and just died. So yeah, I guess some adept masters, they may not pick the exact moment of their death, but they kind of know they can see it coming in advance. And to see the last part of this question is on that note, I've heard that there can be anywhere from instant to 49 days from incarnation to incarnation. Can you explain? Theravada, the official stance of Theravada Buddhism is that it has to be instantaneous. Like the moment of death, you know, when your stream of consciousness stops in this body, the very next moment, like 1 trillionth of a second later, it's got to start up somewhere else. Like if you're taking human life, it'll start up right in a like a an egg being fertilized by a sperm, right at conception. So the stream of consciousness, or the your stream of karma, I guess would be a more accurate way of explaining it. Your karmic stream just cuts off here, and just immediately the very next moment starts up in a new abode. Um, the Tibetans, I think, have the 49-day thing where you're going through the Bardo realms. You're going through like this sort of a limbo. But even that, you could say, is just another existence. It's just a 49-day long existence before you take like a longer term existence as a human or a deva or a tortoise or something. So yeah, the way it actually works in reality, it may not necessarily be strictly according to books, either Theravada Buddhist books or Tibetan Buddhist books. Um, I've read some accounts of reincarnation by Ian Stevenson, who is a professor, I think, at the University of Virginia, um, who was collecting data on especially children who could recollect their past lives. And some of the cases just do not fit what you would expect from Buddhism. Like there was one really strange case in India where there was a boy. He was a relatively young boy, but he was like at least 7 years old, I think, and he died of smallpox. And his father went out to just make arrangements for the funeral. And when he came back home, the kid was alive again. You know, he had recovered. You know, he'd been like at the point of death and then just came back again. But he had a different personality. When he was claiming to be a Brahmin who lived in some neighboring town. And he had all these, you know, I mean, he was, from then on, he would refuse to eat food cooked by his parents because they were of lower class, lower caste. There was a neighbor lady who was a Brahmin who would have to prepare his meals and so forth. There was another case in a different book by Ian Stevenson. This was a Thai monk, so he was a Theravada Buddhist, but he was saying that he took rebirth into his present body before his previous body had completely died. He was like an old man who was bedridden, and he's just sort of drifting in and out of consciousness. And so this monk claimed that he could recall sort of shifting, sort of commuting back and forth between the embryo in the mother's womb and the body that was sort of gradually dying. And so, I mean, it's hard to say exactly how it works. And I assume it's not the way people think it does. It could be just beyond our comprehension. So I think I'll just move on to the next question, considering that that is just the first question. We got lots of them. We're already 10 minutes into this. So I'll just move on to the Arya Swasti Project's next question. Since Buddha, or if Buddha, made a distinction between pain and suffering, can you explain the difference between the two according to Buddhism? Well, both pain, like physical pain, and mental suffering can be called dukkha. Like there's three kinds of dukkha. The first kind is dukkha dukkha, which is just, toothaches or stubbed toes or headaches or whatever, nausea, that kind of a thing. And then there's viparinama dukkha, which is the dukkha caused by changing circumstances, just sort of clinging to what you prefer, and it keeps changing from that. And then there's sankhara dukkha, which is just the sort of the general fuckery that you have to put up with just to be alive. Brushing your teeth, having to work for a living, that sort of thing. The curse of Adam, in other words. Fake chocolate milk. Well, I mean, really, pain is a physical sensation, and suffering is essentially desire or craving, wanting things to be a certain way, just insisting that things be a certain way, or just being attached to a certain way of things that isn't necessarily in accordance with empirical reality. So, yeah, pain is just a physical sensation, like, just any other physical sensation, like an itch or just warmth or coldness, or just, you could even say like visual sensations like colors, sounds, that those are just, they'd be like Vedana in Pali. It'd be like feeling. Whereas the suffering of dukkha, like as a mental state, that is caused by desire. So pain and suffering are not the same thing. And they can both go by the term dukkha in Pali, but the pain doesn't make you unhappy. Any tough guy can tell you that a little bit of pain never hurt anybody. Some guys like a certain amount of pain. They like a little pain in sex. They like a little pain in exercising or mountain climbing or anything like that. The suffering comes from desiring the pain to stop. That is what causes the actual suffering. And I have to admit, it's pretty hardwired into the body, especially like a toothache, something really close to your brain where it's got like a really short connection there. It's not easy. Although I get gout sometimes. It's like a pain in my toe, and I can detach from that. My pain can, or my foot can hurt like hell, but still I can be equanimous just because I don't really care that much. It may be inconvenient if I'm limping, but so long as you don't desire the situation to be otherwise, then it's fine. I mean, your body is feeling pain, but you're not mentally suffering. That's the difference between the two according to a Buddhist, although I don't recall any sort of serious discussion of it in the Pali texts, other than just talking about the different kinds of dukkha and that sort of thing. So I'll just move on to the next question, also from the Arya Swasti Project. And the Arya Swasti Project says, since desirelessness is fundamental tenet in Buddhism, how can someone justify chanting to bless a person, place, situation, etc.? It seems that chanting or praying, even for good, is a violation of Buddhist behavior and belief. Well, it seems to be that there's the assumption here that blessing someone necessarily involves desire. It's like in blessing someone, it's like, may you be well, may you be happy. It's not necessarily that you're craving them to be happy. It's just, you could argue that you have to have desire in order to do anything. Your car gets a flat tire, you get out and change the tire, I mean, it's not because you're craving the tire to be changed. You just see that, it's the thing to do. I mean, it's just what needs to be done, and so you do it. And some monks, I mean, they may see blessings that way. It's just kind of their duty to bless people. And it makes like devout Buddhists, at least in Asia, feel very happy to be blessed by a monk that, especially if they consider the monk to be a seriously practicing monk who has some kind of attainment, they may feel genuinely blessed. So, yeah, just because you're chanting for something, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are craving what you are chanting for. Just like, you do anything, it doesn't mean that you're like attached to the goal or the outcome of the action, like changing the car tire, like I mentioned. So, I think there's a little more along the same vein here, so I'll just move on to the Arya Swasti Project's next question, which is a similar one. What is the difference between chanting for some kind of change and Western ceremonial magic or Christian prayer that also is desirous of a change? Well, again, just because a monk or a Buddhist or anybody is chanting, especially with regard to some purpose of the chant, different kinds of chant, or in Pali, they're called parita. They have different purposes. Like there's the chant you chant. It's like the fish king Jataka in times of drought in order for it to rain so that the crops won't all fail. Or the Angulimala Sutta is chanted for women who are soon to be in labor or who are having difficult labor. Or what's the one with regard to sickness? Gosh, I should remember these things. Anyway, then there's one for like the Metta Sutta is mainly for enemies or people who are, or other beings that are causing trouble. There's the Kanda Sutta, which is for protection from mainly snake bites, although it's also for any kind of like vicious animal, any kind of bitey kind of animal. So, I mean, you can do the chant with an equanimous mind. That's what you do. It's just kind of the duty. It says in the book that that's what it's good for, so you do it for that. It's sort of like taking medicine. You got a cold, you want to take some kind of cough medicine so you won't cough so much. You're not necessarily doing it out of a craving to abolish coughing. It's just like, well, this is what's the problem is, and this is what is done. This is just what you do to make the situation a little better so that my head will be clearer, I'll be able to sleep or whatever. And so it differs from different people. I mean, you could have ceremonial Western magic or a Christian person praying. They're not necessarily attached or craving something. They can have an equanimous mind also. Just as two Buddhists can do exactly the same chant for essentially the same reasons. They're chanting the Kanda Sutta so that they'll be at peace with the animal realm. And one of them is just afraid of being bitten by snakes, and he's just clinging to anything he can do to protect himself from snakes and scorpions and centipedes and so forth. Whereas the other one, he's just beaming metta to animals, and it's just like a side effect that it makes him less likely to get bitten. So just because you do something doesn't necessarily mean that you're craving it to be done. Like even an arahant, supposedly, I mean, according to the texts, arahants bless people. The Buddha, who was fully enlightened, presumably, he went around for a very long time, many, many years, just teaching people out of compassion. So just because you're doing something, especially, or doing something that's has some beneficial result, doesn't mean that you're doing it because you are craving the beneficial result. So I'll just move on to the Arya Swasti Project's next question. How would someone chant for a successful business? How would we know we're in acceptable parameters? I see a lot of true blue Buddhists, not blue hairs, chanting and praying for material things quite a bit. Are they practicing Buddhism or something else? Warm regards. I've been told that Soka Gakkai is a kind of Buddhism where people will be praying for TV sets and that sort of thing. But I really don't have much exposure to Soka Gakkai. In Burma, if like someone is starting a successful business, they might have monks come and chant Parita just to bless the new building. You know, they got this new shop they're going to start. They'll invite monks, they'll offer them food, you know, they'll bow to them, maybe offer them robes or something, and ask them to chant. And the monks will chant the Parita, you know, just blessing the shop. And also in Burma, someone starting a new business will also usually consult with like a fortune teller who will tell them what kind of name to give to their business, because they use a lot of word magic in Burma. And so you have to have, usually you have like two words that have the first letter of the two words just sort of cancel each other out, so that anyone trying to curse the business, like some competitor hires a wizard to curse you, that it doesn't get a good grip on the name, because the name is kind of, by its very structure, sort of like a stealth name. It's weird, but I assume it does happen, that you've got rich, greedy people like praying and chanting for success in business. But I really haven't had much exposure to that, if any, other than just, you know, as a monk, I was invited to people's businesses, and just, you know, you do the chant, which is just, you know, just putting a good vibe into the building, scaring out any ghosts or goblins or anything, and you know, it's just, it's innocuous. I mean, it's not necessarily harmful. You know, it's not necessarily misguided. But chanting and praying for material things, yeah, it's not the best way of spending your time, I think. And are they practicing Buddhism? Probably not what Gautama Buddha originally taught in the Ganges Valley 25 centuries ago. But of course, you know, Buddhism can be just about anything nowadays. So, I mean, they're practicing some kind of Buddhism if they're practicing Buddhists that are chanting for a new TV set or something. There's ways of doing it. And like I was implying earlier, it's really not the outward action. I mean, this is just a common refrain of these Q&As. It's not the outward action that is creating karma, it's the mental states. And two people can do the same outward action with different mental states, and they'll get different karma for it. Two people can do exactly the same action. One will be doing more good than bad, and the other one will be doing more bad than good. So it's like as a monk, I'd go walk for alms through the villages in Asia, and there were some ladies that would only offer food if the neighbors were watching. So, or there was another one woman, the old banana woman. I still remember this woman. She ran a fruit stand, and the only thing she would ever offer, the only thing she'd ever put into my bowl were bananas that were so old that she couldn't sell them anymore. I mean, they were just black. They smelled like wine. You know, they were like liquid inside. You couldn't even really peel one. And so, I mean, she was offering food into a monk's bowl, but I mean, she was just essentially dumping her garbage, trying to get merit for throwing away garbage. So it's really the mental states that determine the ethical value or the karmic value of an action. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is the last question by the Arya Swasti Project. And he says, I heard you speaking about the making of the monk robes, and you mentioned the use of a cauldron for dyeing the material. As a monk can own only 8 items, is there any rules on what items a monk can borrow, rent, or use? I've seen the Theravada monks at the temple build and repair things with power tools. They have access to computers, television, etc. In base terms, if it floats or flies, it's better to rent it anyway. It seems that a monk's life in that regard would not be too different from regular life if all things are available. They just can't claim ownership. Your thoughts? Well, it is a misconception to say that a monk can only own 8 items, and that's the 8 requisites. Which, let's see if I can remember these. You got the 3 robes, which is lower, upper, and outer. You got the belt for holding on the lower robe. You got the bowl. You got the needle, the water strainer, the razor, and let's see, needle, water strainer, razor. I knew I was, oh, that is 8. Okay, I was trying to think of what the next one was going to be. So, I mean, really, those are called the 8 requisites, and every monk should have those, but he's not limited to having those. And if you read the Vinaya text, there's all sorts of things that a monk can own that aren't those 8 requisites. For example, there's a 9th sort of a crypto requisite, which is the sitting cloth. All monks are supposed to have a sitting cloth, even though it's not one of the 8 requisites. And then if you read Vinaya, you see there's all kinds of things. I mean, a monk can have sandals, for example. He can have a walking stick. He can have a shoulder bag. He can have like an ointment, little vial for ointment, and a stick for smearing the ointment. He can have tooth cleaning sticks. He can have certain medicines, you know, for his life. He can store garlic as long as he wants, so long as he's not using it to make his food taste good, but he's using it for medicinal purposes, like to settle his stomach or something. So monks can own all sorts of things. So they're not limited to 8. So I mean that kind of answers most of the question here. There are certain things that monks aren't allowed to own, and that's money for starters, and precious things, anything made out of gold or silver or certain gems are not allowable for a monk. He's not allowed to even touch those things unless somebody drops it at the monastery and he's just picking it up to put it in a safe place until they come back. That's the only time a monk is allowed to handle money, for example. Somebody drops their purse and leaves and just forgets it behind. It's not only is as a monk allowed to handle money in that case, but he's allowed to actually, he's allowed to handle it and just in order to put it somewhere. I mean, it's his duty. If he doesn't do it, it's against the rules. So, yeah, I guess it was just correcting this misconception that monks are only allowed to own the 8 requisites. I mean, the requisites, you know, they're required, but there's all sorts of other things that a monk can own. And if the Buddha were alive today, he might be banning, you know, he might be making like cell phones, you know, unacceptable, something like that. But there's no rule against cell phones or computers, largely because they hadn't been invented yet. And so it never occurred to anybody to make the rule against it. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Tut DVD. This is kind of an interesting one. If Buddhism ceases to exist, does nibbana cease to exist? Well, the concept of nibbana may cease to exist, although assuming that members of other spiritual systems can still become enlightened, they may call it by other names. But nibbana as a metaphysical state, as like the absolute, just going beyond any kind of state, maybe. Yeah, it doesn't really cease to exist, but it just kind of goes beyond the duality of existence and non-existence. And this is just trying to discuss certain things in Buddhism in which reality is not reified. You know, Buddhism just refuses to reify the absolute. And so you can't really say anything about it. Even to call it is too much. So nibbana as the concept may cease to exist, but nibbana as the absolute, it doesn't cease to exist. It never began and it will never cease. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from George Washington Centrist. And George Washington Centrist says, are arahants, sotapannas, etc. pro-social? Will a town, nation, etc., that has more arahants per capita tend to prosper and be a better town or nation than one with fewer arahants, all else being equal? Well, I don't think there's ever very many arahants. All of New York City probably doesn't have more than just a handful, I would assume. I'm just reminded of somewhere in the commentaries, it is stated that the city of Savatthi, which was one of the largest cities in the Ganges Valley during the Buddhist time, had a population, according to the commentaries, of 70 million people, which would be bigger than New York, Tokyo, and Mexico City combined, and that 50 million of them, 5/7 of them, were Aryas, at least Sotapannas. But I'm just skeptical of the whole idea. I mean, even the idea of Sotapannas and so forth. I mean, I've expressed a certain amount of skepticism over the 4 stages of sainthood in Buddhism. I do think that the idea has been corrupted, or to put it more politely, it's just evolved. It has developed over time, and it's not the same as what the Buddha was teaching originally. But I mean, you think about this, sort of like you go back to Genesis in the Old Testament, where God spares a city if it has 10 good men, or even one good person living there. He won't punish the entire town, because that will involve him punishing the good person. And I do think that there can be something like that. I mean, if you have a lot of saints with really good karma living in an area, that may help to protect the area from something really awful happening. Just because it's just not their karma to get bubonic plague or die in an earthquake or something. So it's possible. I mean, if you go with that tack, although even arahants can have bad karma from their past, they're not making any new karma, so you can't really say that they're generating merit. And like Mahamoggallana, who was the Buddha's left-hand man, he was one of the 2 chief disciples. He was literally beaten to a pulp. So, I mean, he didn't have such good karma that he didn't get just brutally murdered. So, I would assume overall, going with like a statistical trends, that a high number of saints in an area could very well lend some protection against really awful things happening. Although I don't really have a lot of data on that, so I can't really say if the hypothesis is valid. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Hayat Tig, and this is kind of a strange one. He says, in your video on the topic of humans being a species of animal, which you did with Heru, you related a story where you attempted to feed a wild jungle fowl named Chicken Lord. You mentioned that instead of eating the peanuts, the rooster instead vocalized for his flock to come and feed. You didn't imitate the rooster's call, and I am curious as to what the king of the chickens sounded like. Could you please attempt your best imitation of this sound? Thanks. Well, I learned from my father long ago that a man cannot do bird calls without looking ridiculous. Because he had this absurd look on his face whenever he would do bird calls. He was fairly good at it, but still, it just wasn't worth the effort. There was, when I lived in this one monastery in Burma, there were a lot of red jungle fowl roaming the area. And also, somebody turned loose a hen at the monastery just to earn merit. Some fortune teller says, you need good karma. You should rescue a chicken from a butcher, turn it loose at the monastery. So a lot of people would get this advice from fortune tellers, and some of them, I mean, it was just like spiritual materialism. They just, take take chicken, release it monastery, and they bring like this little fluffy chicken like this little baby chick. And I would tell them, it's like, that baby chicken is going to last 2 days, 3 days tops. There are monitor lizards, there's hawks, there's all kinds of predators. A baby chicken like that isn't going to survive. And they just get like this sick look on their face, like, I don't want to hear this. I just supposed to release a chicken here, So anyway, somebody released this hen that was like of a fighting chicken breed, like a game hen. And she had like skittish, wild instincts. And also she was sort of a drab brown color. And so she survived long enough to hook up with a red junglefowl rooster. And she had babies, and the babies were about a third grown before she finally got killed by something. And one of these babies of hers grew up into Chicken Lord, who was half gamecock and half red junglefowl. And he was mostly red junglefowl. I mean, the red junglefowl genes apparently are dominant in most cases. So the case he's talking about here is I had a little jar of peanuts. I got lots of peanuts when I went for alms. So I'd keep this jar of peanuts and feed the wild chickens when they would come. And I knew that once they learn what peanuts are, they really like them. And so Chicken Lord was the king of all the chickens in that area. And one time he came by himself. He didn't come with his little harem of hens. So I threw him the peanuts and he wouldn't eat them. I knew that he liked them, but he wouldn't eat them. Instead, he walked away, went up a hill a little bit, and then crowed. It was just the cock-a-doodle-doo. The hens came running. He led them back, and he's making sort of the crooning cluck that a chicken makes, like, hey, I found something good. And he even picked up one of the peanuts, held it down in his beak for one of the hens to take from him. And in a human, that would be considered gallantry, but he was just following chicken instincts, red junglefowl instincts, I guess. But I guess the main question here is, what did it sound like? And I'll just tell you, like a red junglefowl rooster, it's like a barnyard rooster's cock-a-doodle-doo, except it has one less syllable. It's like cock-a-doot-doo, and it's like soprano. It's very high pitched. It's more high pitched than the average village or the average domesticated rooster. So it's like a soprano cock-a-doot-doo, and you can do that one yourself if you like. And I'll just move on to the next question. Oh, wait. I almost skipped this one. I did that last time. This is another question by Hey It's Tig. And Hey It's Tig says, have you had to deal with either voluntary or involuntary sleeplessness when you were a monk? I've read and can also attest from my own experience that austerities and ascetic practices often lead to the practitioner's inability to sleep or fall asleep normally. What are your thoughts on this? Thanks. I think everybody has had involuntary sleeplessness or just insomnia occasionally. I mean, just for whatever reason. You drank too much Asian Red Bull or something and you couldn't sleep. But most of the sleeplessness that I recall as a monk was voluntary, because if you read the text, a monk is only supposed to sleep about 4 hours per night. And I've always been a sleepyhead. Before I was a monk, I preferred about 9 hours of sleep. And so trying to go from 9 hours of sleep to 4 hours of sleep, I was just like a walking zombie at first. And my body needs more than 4 hours sleep unless I'm doing really good meditation practice. The only one time in my life was I able to go for an entire month averaging less than 4 hours of sleep per day. And I was some of the best meditation practice of my life. So if you're doing intensive meditation practice, you don't need to sleep as much. But there was another time I was at a meditation retreat, and I was trying to get by on like 5.5 or 4.5 hours of sleep per night, 4.5 to 5. And I was starting to dream, like almost to the point of hallucinating before I was even asleep. I'd be like sitting in a meditation hall trying to meditate, and there'd just be all these images coming up, and like somebody would be standing in front of me talking. I'd be about ready to answer, and then I realized, wait, I'm sitting here in a meditation hall in Burma. So I had to get up to about 5.5 hours of sleep, and then the hallucinations or the waking dreams wouldn't start until like the last meditation session of the evening, and that was manageable. But yeah, there were times I'd do like vigils. I think they're called vigils, like in the Ajahn Chah tradition, often fueled by Red Bull. And Asian Red Bull is way stronger than Western Red Bull. Yeah, but the austerities and ascetic practices, they didn't really lead to an inability to sleep or fall asleep normally. It was just that I was deliberately trying to sleep less. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Jeffrey88. And Jeffrey88 says, what do you think of Kundalini Yoga practice? I got into Kundalini after hearing that Bruce Lee practiced it. I am convinced that helped him get his lightning fast speed. And the fact is, I really don't know much about Kundalini. And if you don't know much about Kundalini, you shouldn't practice it, because I've heard that practicing Kundalini Yoga without a skilled teacher can be dangerous. You know, you can blow out the what is it, the Kundalini. It's like an energy channel going up your spine, and the seven chakras are all connected with this Kundalini channel. And I know a little bit about the chakras and all that, but yeah, I'm fairly ignorant with regard to Kundalini Yoga practice, because I've never practiced it. It's like a Hindu thing. So yeah, maybe Bruce Lee was so fast and could catch a fly with chopsticks because of that, but I don't know. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, hello, Panyo. Can you speak on the duration of first jhana? I've heard that it permeates one's being and existence permanently once it is reached or experienced, or does it require constant cultivation? Well, this question reminds me of the Gautika Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, which is one of my favorite suttas just because it's so weird. And there was a monk named Gautika who was living at the Black Rock at Isigili Cave, and he kept getting jhana and losing it, and getting it and losing it, and getting it and losing it. And this happened 7 times. Finally, the 7th time he got jhana, and he was thinking to himself, if I die with jhana, I'm guaranteed of a Brahma realm at least. But if you die without jhana, there's no guarantees of anything. And so before he lost jhana the 7th time, he committed suicide. He cut his own throat, and then he became an arahant. He became enlightened at the moment of death. So that would suggest that, once you get it, it doesn't just abide in you permanently. I mean, it has what you could consider to be permanent effects. Like someone who takes LSD and has like a spiritual, like a mystical experience, or even without the LSD, you have a mystical experience. Even though the mystical experience ends, then it gives you this memory, or this new frame of reference that, that can be fairly permanent. But, I mean, the mystical state itself is not permanent. And it's the same way with jhana. It seems to me that the jhana states are not permanent. If they were permanent, they would be unconditioned, and that'd be, enlightenment itself. But anything that is conditioned, and that's all 4 jhanas are conditioned states, then they are impermanent. And so there may be a permanent, like, lingering after effect of having jhana. I mean, it will cause like a significant shift in your perception that may be lasting, but the state of jhana itself is not lasting. So it may require constant cultivation if you want to keep attaining jhana. You want to master it. You want to become an adept at jhana. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Fred. And Fred says, can merit really be accrued? If so, where is it stored? Well, merit is just a certain shift in the stream of your karma, in the momentum of your psychic energy. Merit would be sort of an upward shift in that. So I guess it'd just be stored in the momentum of like the mental energy that is your karma, your sankharas. So I mean, it's not stored in a container. It's not stored in like the alaya vinyana, or the storehouse consciousness that some of the Yogacara Buddhists of Mahayana talk about. It's just that this moment by moment stream of like consciousness and mental states, it just has a different momentum to it. Just a shift in the momentum, and that is where you could say it is stored, but really it's not really stored. It's just the momentum. It's like if you've got like a road that's moving eastwards, you don't say, well, where is the eastwardness stored? I mean, it's just the road is just headed in that direction, which is kind of a bad analogy. And so, in embarrassment, I'll move on to the next question. This is from Arain. I finished the yoo-hoo. Now it's time for purple drink. And Arain says, define belief versus faith and how those concepts relate to Buddhism. Belief versus faith. Well, belief, I did a lot of contemplation of this whole notion of belief and perception and so forth. And I came to the conclusion that belief is perception. Belief and perception are the same thing. Also, perception and samsara are essentially the same thing. So belief is a kind of delusion. Belief is just the idea that you know something that you don't really know. Faith, on the other hand, mainly means the same thing. Mainly, belief and faith are the same, although faith can also have other interpretations. Like I've mentioned more than once, St. John of the Cross and dark faith, where with St. John of the Cross, he was a mystic, and he like systematically cultivated mysticism, or what in the contemplative sects of Catholicism called contemplation, which is like meditation except you're not thinking anything. And so St. John of the Cross would say, anything that isn't God, just dismiss it from your mind. God can't be imagined, so you dismiss the imagination. God cannot be understood through reason, so out goes reason. God cannot be seen or felt or heard or smelled. Out go the senses, until just every mental state is, since it cannot know or contain God, you dismiss it until everything is dismissed, and then you realize that there's still something there. And according to St. John of the Cross, that is the all-pervasive Spirit of God. And he called that awareness dark faith. You're not thinking anything. You're not believing anything. It's just that there's this awareness of this unspoken, unspeakable reality, like down in your core. So that kind of faith, if you can call that faith, would be superior to belief. But as a general rule, belief and faith are the same. Although in Buddhism, the term usually translated as faith is saddha, and some translators prefer renderings like, what is it? Not certainty. Why am I having a mental block now? Confidence. So they prefer something like confidence. And I mean, that's not necessarily the same as belief, but all in all, in very early Buddhism and in like Madhyamaka in Mahayana Buddhism, belief is delusion. It's just samsaric. It's clinging to some samsaric symbol, thinking that is reality when it's not. So, the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata says that a monk should not believe anything. And it's not that he's a skeptic, it's just that he's a mystic, and he knows that reality cannot be contained in beliefs. Reality cannot be contained in mental perceptions. It sort of underlies all of that. But the reality is just, you can't know it through symbols, because once you symbolize it, it's not reality anymore. Also, there are a few texts, at least two passages that say a monk should have no faith. One is in the Atthakavagga, and one, ironically, is in the Dhammapada. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Austin. And Austin says, I know you haven't been doing sitting practice since you've disrobed, but have you done at least one sitting practice on LSD? I would like to know how that would go for someone of your caliber. Maybe you could achieve higher qualities of meditation. Well, as it turns out, I did meditate on LSD once. I was in Burma at the time. I tried to do it a second time, but it didn't work out quite so well. Also, I've meditated on ayahuasca more than once. Then that's just, almost in desperation, where you're just trying to just kind of keep a grip on yourself. But with the LSD one is what Austin here is asking about. And I went to Burma, and a friend of mine had given me a little vial of liquid LSD. And it was supposed to have, 50 drops or 100 drops or something when it was full. Some of it had already been used. So there should have been 2 doses left. Let's say 8 drops, so there should have been like 16 drops there. So the first night that I took it, I took the recommended dose, and I practiced meditation. And I was really, something like LSD, it just overwhelms everything else, including my meditative efforts, I think. And when almost every time I have taken LSD in my life, almost every time it's a mystical experience. It's a religious experience where everything is just a manifestation of infinity and divinity and perfection. Just everything. So meditation could have quieted it down maybe a little bit, quieted down the mental actions, but on that particular time, I was in the Dhamma hall of this monastery. I was living in a little room off the side of the main Dharma hall, or Dhamma hall. And so I was sitting in the main Dhamma hall in front of the big statue, the altar, with this big Buddha statue there. And I was just overwhelmed with gratitude, and just, I usually don't bow to statues, but I was bowing to that statue over and over again that night. I was just in a very devotional, gratitude-oriented state that time. And then the second time I took it, I just took what was left, assuming that it would just be one more dose, and it was way more than one dose. It was like the most acid I've ever taken in my life at a Burmese Buddhist monastery, and I just pretty much liquefied. I just melted into the floor. I wasn't doing much sitting practice that night. So I hope that was entertaining, if not educational. So I'll just move on to Austin's next question. And Austin's next question is, when we don't have answers to hard-hitting questions about, say, the accounting problem, is it better to have faith in Buddhism than to be skeptical of its claims? I don't know. It just seems like a very big problem for the religion. And the accounting problem that Austin is referring to here is with regard to a question he asked in the previous Q&A, I think, where he's talking about how, the universe has been here forever, and little by little, some beings are being liberated. But where does all the extra beings come from? Why is it that there's more people in the world instead of fewer people in the world? And it's just trying to deal with infinity, I think. I remember in that Q&A, when I was answering the first question about this accounting problem, I was pointing out that there may be new beings being spun off to replace the ones that are being liberated. And I do think that is possible, that there's just new generation of beings that, karmic streams that are just taking the place of the ones that are leaving. Also, you can say that there are an infinite number of worlds, so maybe some of the people that are being reborn into this world the world they were on, it just no longer exists, or had a population crash for some reason, and so they're just shifting over to this one. Or again, I was saying that in the video when I was answering the first part of this question, that some people might be moving up from the animal realm or the ghost realms, which would account for why there are so many NPCs and just sort of people that are just sort of sleepwalking and believing whatever they're told. Although I think people have pretty much always been that way. So I don't think that there really is that much of an accounting problem. I mean, it's kind of open-ended, but I don't think that it really is a crucial stumbling block for Buddhist philosophy, in that there have been an infinite number of beings in this universe, suffering, unenlightened beings, with, little by little, a few are getting free, but why is it that there's still like increasing number of humans in the world? They're coming from other realms, or alternate Earths, or like I said, another possibility is that they're just new beings that are just being spun off, sort of like the standing state theory in cosmology. I think we're getting a cosmology question lower down. Some people believe there was the Big Bang, and then everything started there, and then there are some who think that there was no Big Bang. It's just that new stars and new matter are somehow just being spontaneously evolved. And it could be the same way with suffering beings in this universe. They're just being spontaneously evolved. So I really don't see that as a crucial problem, or a very big problem. So I'll just move on to Austin's next question. Any update on Ajahn Punadamo coming back? If he can't, I would really love to see some videos with more monks. Maybe Venerable Varapanyo can make more guest appearances. Well, Ajahn Punadamo, he told Brian that he wasn't ready to start up again with the videos. He got a lot of flack from some of his supporters for being on one of Brian's UFO meetings. I'm going to be on one of them next month, I think. But I won't be getting the same sort of flack, I think, because I already have the reputation for being a naughty boy or something. But it's possible, if I reached out to Ajahn Punadamo, he might be willing to do videos just with me, or with me and somebody besides Brian. I don't think that he got any flack for appearing with me. Maybe he did a little, but I think most of the problem was that Brian, he's sort of a Holocaust denier and thinks Hitler did nothing wrong and that sort of thing. And that rubs some people the wrong way for some reason. So, I don't think Venerable Varapanyo would be wanting to do any more videos with me. There was sort of a conflict of view or something that occurred with regard to his own channel. I uploaded one video we did that he didn't want anybody but him to upload, and I never agreed to it. I just uploaded it, and he didn't like that. So, but maybe Ajahn Punadamo. I really should contact him, I suppose. I've been doing videos with other people and just by myself, so I haven't really felt an urgent need to do videos with Ajahn Punadamo, although I do like him and he's very intelligent and it's fun to talk with him. So, that's still a possibility. So I'll just go on to Austin's next question. What's your take on the whole trans identity issue? Because for me, this is a complete non-starter for the reason of self being illusory. To my understanding, I believe non-binary is not identifying with either gender. Is this hitting closer to the mark of non-self? Well, that's kind of two questions, isn't it? The first one is, what's your take on the whole trans identity issue? And it is kind of interesting that in Buddhism, trans identity issues receive more acceptance than in a Christian culture. Like, I've mentioned before that in Burmese villages, like remote Burmese villages, you can have trans people there. You know, there's some biological male who dresses like a woman and acts like a woman, calls himself by a female name, and the rest of the village will just tolerate him. I mean, he might not be the most popular person in the village, but I mean, he doesn't get ostracized or anything, and that's partly because of the Buddhist idea of rebirth, that they believe that this such a person is called a lu win za, which is they're sort of a manifestation of past karma, and in this case, it would be someone switching over from male to female or from female to male in the course of a number of lives, and they're sort of mid-transition between male and female. So, I mean, that is explainable going with Buddhist metaphysics and just Buddhist cosmology in a way that it just doesn't fit in with like Christianity. In Christianity, you know, God just creates you male or female, and you have to go along with that, or you're sinning against God and nature or some such. But in Buddhism, I mean, there are ways of explaining it. In some cases, I mean, nowadays a lot of it is just a fashion trend. It's like a leftist fashion trend. Also, it's just a sign of the decline of Western civilization that eunuchs are rising into social prominence, which is in the past was considered a telltale sign that a civilization was in decline when eunuchs start getting higher social status. Although now they're not called eunuchs, they're called something else. So let's see. The next part of the question is, see, to my understanding, I believe. I mean that's self-view too. I mean, to my understanding, I believe, you know, because for me. So I mean, you're dealing in samsara. You're gonna have to be dealing with some kind of self-view anyway. Even the Buddha would say, you know, I and you and me, and you know, he'd be using first-person pronouns and so forth, even though he supposedly, presumably, no longer had self-view. But getting to the next part of the question here is non-binary is not identifying with either gender. Is this hitting closer to the mark of non-self? It would depend on the individual, because some people, you know, they're just really big on me. You know, it's identity politics. It's all about me. I'm just this alienated person who nevertheless is identified with some group or other. And non-binary is like an oppressed group that you get social points for being a member of in certain circles. And so it's like a fashion trend to be non-binary. And so some people will just cultivate non-binariness out of delusion or whatever. Although really, I mean, if a person is like an evolved saint, they might be non-binary too. I mean, they just might not be sexual at all. They might have just left all of that behind, like Brahma beings in the high heaven realms in Buddhism. You know, there's no male or female, so it's all non-binary. You know, they've just left sex behind. So that kind of non-binary would be closer to the mark of non-self, but just following a fashion trend and just taking on all comers, being, what do you call it? Not polyamorous, but where they're just willing to have pansexism. What is it? Or they're just willing to have sex with anybody or anything. You know, that could be kind of non-binary too, but that's not a very highly spiritually evolved state. So I'll just move on to Austin's last question here. What's your take on cosmological arguments, the Big Bang, and the Buddhist idea of the universe being here forever? Well, I can go along with the Big Bang. There's always been some cosmologists who don't like it, and I think there's been kind of an upsurge in recent years of like people preferring like the steady state theory that somehow you know, new matter is being inserted into the universe through, I don't know, quasars or something. Um, but even the Buddhist idea of the universe being here forever, it's yeah, it's like samsara is this beginningless and endless. But nevertheless, this like the astronomical universe eventually dies and then is replaced by a new astronomical universe, which would be not so much in conflict with the Big Bang theory, especially if it's like if the Big Bang, eventually the universe starts collapsing in on itself, and you get the big crunch, and then it explodes again with another Big Bang. That would be fairly similar, not exactly the same, but fairly similar to the Buddhist idea of, evolving universes and devolving universes, and expanding and contracting and that sort of thing. But cosmological arguments, I think it's all academic, really, because I'm really not a materialist. So, but I mean, even though I'm not a materialist, I can take certain scientific theories as useful working hypotheses or useful tools, like Darwinian evolution. I mean, it's very elegant theory. It makes very good sense. The evidence seems to support it. So I can say, okay, even though um, I do think that physical matter cannot be said to really exist unless there's some kind of perceiving mind to perceive it. And when you're back at the stage of anaerobic bacteria, a billion years after the Earth was formed, then who knows? Maybe it was devas that were perceiving it or something. But yeah, the Big Bang is similar. I mean, there is some. It seems like most of the evidence seems to support it better than other theories. So I'm willing to go along with it until the whole theory gets overthrown. So the next question is from Raphael46, formerly known as Rafi46. And Raphael46 says, did the Buddha say that soldiers who kill go to hell even if they killed in self-defense? That's a good question. I don't recall any suttas that say that, although it wouldn't surprise me if there's some obscure sutta or just some sutta that I'm forgetting that does say that soldiers will go to hell. I mean, there's a sutta that says even like actors and comedians will go to hell, musicians, and which is, I mean, that's pretty harsh. That's really pushing it. I'm kind of skeptical of that. That like musicians and comedians and actors are all going to go to hell. Some of them will, presumably, but just because they're actors, I don't think that's going to do it. Or musicians. And soldiers are definitely making weightier karma than most entertainers. And so, yeah, I mean, they're going to have some sort of karmic effects from killing, even if they killed in self-defense. And I mean, Buddhist ethics are very strict, even though it's an atheistic system with no God decreeing that you must do this and you must not do that. It's just like how the mind works. It's based on human psychology, and yeah, if you're you pretty much have to be a saint, like a renunciant. You have to renounce society in order to really be as ethical as possible to be, to make as little bad karma as possible. So it may be that the Buddha did say that soldiers who kill go to hell, even if they killed in self-defense. But I do think that in a Buddhist culture, it is advisable to have the idea of the soldier as the tragic hero who sacrifices his own spiritual welfare for the sake of others so that they can live in peace and practice Dharma. So, next question from Raphael46. Why didn't the Buddha preach against polygamy and polyandry? Well, I assume he didn't preach against polyandry because it just wasn't a thing. Polyandry is like one woman having more than one husband. And that's relatively rare in society, especially in traditional societies. I assume there have been like matriarchal civilizations or cultures that one woman would have more than one man, but usually it's the other way around, just because of biology. I mean, one woman with one husband is going to have approximately the same amount of children, so long as her one husband isn't shooting blanks, as one woman with 50 husbands. Whereas one man with 50 wives can have approximately 50 times as many children as if he had only one wife. And one of my favorite examples of that is King Mongkut of Thailand. I don't remember which Rama number he was, but he was a monk until he was about 40 years old. And then his brother, the king, died. He was next in succession. He dropped out of the monkhood to become king. And even though he became king when he was about 40, he still managed to have approximately 100 children by a large harem of wives. But getting back to the Buddha here, why didn't he preach against polygamy? Well, I mean, his own father married more than one wife. According to the legend anyway, King Suddhodana, the Buddha's father, married two sisters. One was Mahamaya, the Buddha's mother, and one was Mahapajapati Gautami, who was his aunt and also his stepmother, something like that. So, I mean, it was just a cultural thing in India at the time. It was pretty much universal. I don't think there was any need for him to preach against something that probably people weren't going to take very seriously anyway. I mean, he didn't preach against eating meat, or at least he didn't preach against meat, butchering animals and so forth. He did maybe a little bit, like with regard to cows especially. There's not much point in preaching against war, because he knew that it just wasn't realistic. Kings were going to keep having wars, and they certainly did, including Buddhist kings. But I mean, he would teach something if he felt that it was ripe, like animal sacrifice. He preached against animal sacrifice, and it was just that India was just ready to kind of let go of animal sacrifice for the most part. There's still some animal sacrifice going on in India, like at Kali temples and so forth, but I don't think it would have served any purpose for him to preach against polygamy, and who knows, maybe he didn't have any problems with it at all. I mean, he was a son of a polygamous father, and he turned out pretty well. So I'll just move on to the next question, also from Raphael 46. Bhikkhu Bodhi argues in his introduction to the Anguttara Nikaya that there appears to be corruption of the suttas by the compilers. His reason is that those suttas where the Buddha allegedly disparages women are in stark contrast with others where he receives lay women, his ordination of women, his chief female disciples, and the role of female lay benefactors. Is this a legitimate opinion or an attempt to adapt Buddhism to the 21st century? Well, Bhikkhu Bodhi is definitely a biased lefty in his politics. And so if he sees that there's some corruption because it's, some suttas are saying this and some suttas are saying the opposite, he's going to be inclined to favor the idea that the Buddha really taught the most politically correct stuff, and that the politically incorrect stuff is less likely to be by the Buddha, just because the Buddha was wise and so he must be politically correct by 21st century standards. Then no doubt there is some corruption in the texts. There definitely is corruption in the texts. Oh, I just got a notice that I have to plug in my computer because the battery's running dead. There. That would have been embarrassing, to have the battery run dead in the middle of this. So, yeah, there is corruption in the text. Not everything that the Buddha says in the texts is likely to be, 100% just reliably the teachings of the Buddha. That I totally agree with. But then to use that as an argument for just dismissing the parts you don't like and emphasizing the parts you do like, yeah, that's sophistry right there. So I assume that Bhikkhu Bodhi is guilty of a certain amount of sophistry based on what I have read of some of his opinions. So I'll just move on to the next question. After looking at this, I want to make sure that I answered this fairly well, at least mediocrely well. I think I just invented a new word, mediocrity. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, even if you look at the ordination of women, I mean, he's using the ordination of women as like evidence that the Buddha really was in favor of, equal rights for females and stuff. But if you read the text, I mean, he really did not like the idea of ordaining women. He had to be talked into it by Ananda. And even then he said, well, Buddhism will survive only half as long now because of women being ordained. So, yeah, I think for the most part, it's just leftist ideas trying to like adjust Buddhism to be more leftist or some such, more politically correct. Okay, so the last question by Raphael 46. Who was more ahead of his time in your opinion, the Buddha or Jesus? Well, by being ahead of one's time means like you're ahead of the people around you in your culture, and no doubt it had to have been Jesus is way ahead of the people around him, which is one reason why Jesus' disciples just did not understand him very well, or based on the New Testament. Jesus was not nearly as successful at teaching his disciples as the Buddha was. The Buddha had lots of enlightened disciples according to the text, whereas Jesus, like even Saint Peter, was lying and just denying that he ever knew Jesus on the like, what was it, the night that Jesus was arrested or crucified or something. I don't remember the exact details. But yeah, they just turned him into the Messiah and just worship him as the Son of God. At least some of them did. So yeah, the Buddha was. I mean, there were a lot of other teachers in ancient India that were peers of the Buddha. I mean, he talked about enlightened beings, in his time, in the plural. And he wasn't necessarily talking just about his own disciples, although, of course, that's blasphemy. I mean, to a devout Theravada Buddhist, only a Theravada Buddhist can possibly become enlightened, but with very few exceptions. But Jesus, he was like I just get the idea. He was too advanced for his culture, and the products of that culture just did not understand him, and so they just promptly deified him. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Aurelian. And Aurelian says, some of us still accept military commissions or government appointments despite what we know, because we feel a sense of duty to take on the futile work of trying to run things and perhaps make some small changes from within the system. There are many Chinese and Hindu texts relating to public and military administration and good governance, but I have not come across any specifically Buddhist texts on good governance. I know there is the dialogue with King Menander, which I have not read, but here it may be strictly philosophical in nature. Do you know any writings of early Buddhist origin on such topics? Well, there are some suttas in the text where the Buddha is talking about, the cause of crime is poverty, and kings should give subsidies to farmers, give them seed grain, and make sure that they have enough to start out in the agricultural business and so forth, and that will cause more prosperity and less crime and so forth. There are some texts in the Pali Suttas themselves along those lines, and also with regard to politics, some of the inscriptions of Ashoka, who was a little while after the Buddha, but it's early Buddhism, and he gives some of his political ideas in his rock inscriptions and pillar inscriptions. So you might look there. But yeah, I don't think, I assume there have been Pali texts on, not canonical ones, but just written in a Buddhist language about good governance. But they're not very well known. I assume if you look, you may be able to find such a thing, maybe written in Sri Lanka in medieval times or something. So I'll just move on to Aurelian's next question here. It would appear that in many ways Hinduism is closer than Buddhism to the instinctive beliefs of the average American. Belief in soul, creator God, spelled G-A-W-D, generally devotional standpoint, enjoyment of song, dance, jewelry, and frivolity. The biggest issue may well be giving up hamburgers. Do you find Buddhism or Hinduism better positioned to attract religiously non-affiliated Americans in the near future? I think Buddhism, just because there's less mythological baggage, at least less mythological baggage that is considered to be essential to the system. It can just be like dry philosophy, and to like scientifically minded people. It's just Buddhism is like rational. It makes sense. It doesn't have a lot of mythology, that just stories that you have to believe. So I think probably Buddhism is better suited to fit Western, modern, or postmodern Americans, or just Western people in general. Some people gravitate more to Hinduism, like the hippies in the late 60s, early 70s, tended to prefer Hinduism to Buddhism, although the beatniks before them were more into Zen Buddhism. So I think all in all, just the rationality and the lack of like the garish, the blue the paintings of Krishna, and he's all blue and he's got sort of feminine features and the big eyelashes and maybe multiple arms, and some people gravitate more to Hinduism. Like New Age is more Hinduistic than Buddhistic, but I think your average doctor or like engineer or just average person in general would like Buddhism, just because it's sort of like Stoicism. It's just like it just makes sense. So I'll just go with Buddhism on that one, and I'll just move on to Aurelian's next question. Lots of questions tonight. The biggest difficulty I have faced in accepting Buddhism is its relationship to willpower. Will could be the very characteristic of Western society that most needs to be resurrected at this juncture, but it seems to be the very thing Buddhism seeks to kill. Perhaps the problem lies more in language and translation. Annihilation of the will would be a serious issue to the wide acceptance of Buddhism, as it creates difficulty for me personally. I have come across the concept of virya, or energy, as a paramita in Buddhism, and this seems to be a related concept to willpower. Can you elaborate on the relationship of Buddhism and willpower, as I think this is an extremely important topic and appears to have some nuance that needs clarification? Yeah, well, virya is sort of like resolute, manly energy. Like virya, like the V-I-R, I mean, it literally means man. Like the triumvirate, virile in English, has the same Indo-European root. Also, there's the parami of aditana, which means determination, where you just stick with something. You don't give up. So, that's kind of willpower, but, I assume that it depends on how you define will. Karma is will. For a layperson, you're supposed to be doing good karma. It's not until you're like very advanced renunciant that you leave both good and bad behind. You leave behind all karma. So, most people in the world just are not ready to annihilate the will, and so you cultivate like wholesome karma, wholesome will, goodwill. So that would be fine, especially for lay people. Annihilation of the will, that's like very advanced. That's what the Arahant does, and there's never very many of those, and they're just off alone in a forest somewhere as a general rule. just in some cell somewhere in a cloister. So let's see. Buddhism and willpower. Yeah, well, I mean, will is like a good translation of Chaitanya, which is essentially what karma is. But I mean, even so, it's sort of like what I was talking about above, where you don't have to crave something in order to do something. And it's the same way with will. I mean, you don't have to have this will to do something in order to do it. Like an arahant is not creating any more will because he's not creating any more karma. And Abhidhamma philosophy has to invent some new kind of kriya chitta, like functional consciousness, just so that arahants can do anything. But really, I mean, you are able to act without just like doing it through force of will. You know, it's just, you just do the right thing. Like the more wise you become, you just see what is to be done and you do it. Maybe it's just your duty or just this natural flow of what you're doing. And it doesn't require any kind of like brute force of will, like strong, like in what's the inclination, intention, volition. Yeah, it just flows. Like the more wise you become, the less will you have to use to get things done, until you get to like what the Tao Te Ching calls Wu Wei, or non-action. And you still do things. Like there's like one of my favorite verses of the Tao Te Ching is, let's see, he who follows learning increases day by day. He who follows Tao decreases day by day. He becomes less and less until he arrives at non-action. With non-action, there is nothing that cannot be achieved. So I think that would apply to this issue of willpower. But for a layperson, generating will in wholesome directions is still good. You're gathering up treasures in heaven. It's not until you are ready to just bail out of the entire system, and very few people are, that you just abandon all will altogether. So the next question is from Mary, spelled Merry. And Mary says, did you ever, even for a moment, think that you had attained some advanced state like Sotapanna, Anagami, or Arahantship? Well, there was one time when it was like a spiritual growth spurt that I went through. And I won't go into all the details. We've already been at this for almost an hour and a half. And I'm maybe 3/4 of the way through the questions. But I just had this click or something. I won't go into all the details, but I was having a really good meditation, like some of the best in my life. There was only one other time in my life that I had anything comparable to that with regard to the depth and quality of my meditation. And I was starting to think, well, maybe I've attained some stage, you know. But the thing is that anything conditioned is impermanent. And so it didn't last. So, I mean, what state or anything, I mean, it's best not even to think about it, because, I don't know, it just kind of locks you in, so to speak. And of course, like the Diamond Cutter Sutra, which is heresy because it's Mahayana Buddhist, says that even a Sotapanna doesn't think I am a Sotapanna, because they're already beyond self-view. They're beyond I am this, I am that, I, me, mine. So, yeah, there was especially one time in my life, it was back around 2004, I think, where everything just got way better. You know, it was just like this like spontaneous mystical states and so forth. I've gone into some details over it. Maybe I can just give a whole video about it sometime. But it's just never the way you think it is. No matter how you think it is or it's going to be, it's just going to be something different. So it's best not to waste too much mental energy on that. So next question from Mary, spelled Merry. When is your birthday? Gosh, that's a tough one, isn't it? Actually, my birthday is Thursday, every Thursday. Which is, I mean, if you ask a Burmese person when is their birthday, they're Moinate, which literally means birthday. They'll tell you the day of the week. So, yeah. Although actually, my birthday is July 25th, going with the Western calendar. I think my birthday in Burmese is the 5th day of the waxing moon of Wagong. So, yeah, so because I'm born on July 25th, I'm technically a Leo. Although I think all that astrology stuff is bullshit because we Leos are naturally skeptical. But, I mean, it's weird because, I mean, I'm sorry to totally sidetrack this very simple question that could have been answered in one sentence with a digression on astrology. But technically, even though I'm a Leo, technically, I was born under the sign of Virgo because all Leos are born under the sign of Virgo now because of precession of the equinoxes. So you're not even born under the sign of your astrological sign anymore, which makes me wonder. I mean, are Leos now? Do they behave like Virgos used to behave, or what? I mean, they've done scientific studies that show that people born at different times of year have different general personality trends. Although whether that included Australia and like Argentina, like south of the equator, it could be a seasonal thing. So I'm not sure about that. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is also from Mary, spelled with an E. Have you ever met Kurt Cobain or other Nirvana members? And this is because we both come from Aberdeen, Washington. And Kurt Cobain went to the same high school as me. But I think when I was a senior, he was just a freshman. So, of course, he was just a pathetic nobody. I never heard of him or anything. You know, he's just some face in the halls at best. You know, he hadn't started singing professionally yet, obviously. So, yeah, I don't remember ever meeting any of the members of Nirvana, even though we have the same hometown. I did have, my stepbrother was Kurt Vanderhoof, who was a guitar player for a band called Metal Church. Also, he was in a punk band. He was a drummer in a punk band called The Lude back in the early 80s. So, and maybe Metal Church would be the second most famous band from Aberdeen, Washington. And I did know one of the guys fairly intimately because he was my stepbrother. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Hereward the Wake. And Hereward the Wake says, in connection with jhana, are there any teachers or retreats and so forth that you would recommend? Well, I mean, jhana in Theravada Buddhism, there are not a whole lot of teachers of it that I know of. There's, I mean, the most well-known in a Burmese tradition would be Pa Auk Sayadaw and Pa Auk Doya and branches of Pa Auk Doya. They emphasize jhana. Although a lot of what is practiced there, not all of it necessarily, but a lot of what is practiced at these places is like hypnotic trance. It's like auto-hypnosis, self-induced hypnotic trance. And it's unfortunate that I really can't think of any teachers or retreats or monasteries, meditation centers that I could heartily recommend as teachers of jhana. Partly because most meditation techniques in Burma, ever since Mahasi Sayadaw, are teaching so-called vipassana or mindfulness-based meditation. Pa Auk is one of the main outliers, or he's just, you know, he's one of the few that aren't doing that. There are a few more. There's some famous monk who mostly lives in Burma. I think he does international tours now. He's in the The Ingu tradition, and it's the The Ingu tradition is just a full spectrum of the ridiculous and the sublime, and he does weird stuff. Like he'll just require everyone to meditate in the full lotus position for like 8 hours without moving. So that probably the agony just causes you to sort of dissociate from your body or something after a while. But I think that might be a kind of jhana system. Um, let's see. Ledi Sayadaw, who was the teacher of S.N. Goenka, or was he the teacher of the teacher of the teacher of S.N. Goenka? Yeah, he was the teacher of Uba Kin's teacher, I think. So that would make him the... Never mind. Anyway, Ledi Sayadaw was... he taught some jhana, but the Ledi tradition now is very lax. It's got a reputation for not being a very serious tradition. Most of the monks just aren't meditating. The founder of my tradition, Tampulu Sayadaw, even though the standard method that he was teaching was similar to the Mahasi method, it was mindfulness based. Nevertheless, he did teach jhana to some people, or at least samatha meditation, like katina, or not katina. What am I saying katina for? Kasinas. It's like the colored disc that you use as a meditation object. So, yeah, but with regard to any teachers or retreats that I would recommend, probably the best that I know of. There might be like Thai traditions I don't know of, like Sinhalese traditions I don't know of, but of the ones I do know of, Pa'at would be the obvious choice. That would be the best. It's not perfect, but it's the best one I know of. So I'll just move on to the next question from, I don't know if they did this on purpose to just make it hard for me to say their name, but their name is Siovaksh N. Sipadzidana. And Siovaksh N. Sipadzidana says, in the Atthakavagga, the Buddha says to hold no views, which is something Theravada got this wrong, but Mahayana preserved this from pre-sectarian Buddhism. What are some other things in the suttas that Mahayana have preserved that are not believed in Theravada? Are there things that none believe in and it wasn't preserved in either? Well, that's kind of a good question. That's an interesting question. So essentially, what are early teachings, like pre-Theravadan teachings of Buddhism that Mahayana gets right, that they have preserved, whereas Theravada has not preserved? And as he says, just the idea that you shouldn't believe anything, to hold no views, to cling to no views, is, it's taught in the Atthakavagga, but in the commentaries of the Atthakavagga, they just pretty much, they backpedal on that one. They say, well, when it says you should have no views, it means you should have no wrong views. And when it says you should have no perception, it means you should have no wrong perceptions. Which, what's the point? Why even say don't have wrong views? That just goes without saying. Or it would go without saying if it wasn't said. So yeah, that's a good question. I would say there are a few obscure little fragments in the Pali Suttas that refer to nirvana as infinite formless consciousness. And in Mahayana, they took the ball and ran with it, like the Dharmakaya or the one mind. There's a lot of different terms for it in Mahayana Buddhism that really are essentially just going with the idea of nirvana as infinite formless consciousness. And that got rejected by Theravada. But it's, in a way, it was maybe like an experiment in trying to explain what can't be explained. Because eventually Theravada did adopt the wise position of just not reifying the absolute. Not trying to make any assertions about the absolute, because no kind of assertion, no kind of idea or perception is going to stick to the absolute. Something that is infinite and formless, your mind can't grasp it. You cannot grasp that. You can't wrap your head around it at all. And so it's best to just leave it alone. Just kind of refer to it indirectly and, go with the Upanishadic idea of neti neti, not this, not that. So that's one thing that I think Mahayana preserved, even though it didn't really catch traction in Theravada, is the whole idea of this infinite reality that pervades the universe. Another one is dependent co-arising, or paticca samuppada. I think probably the best account or explanation of dependent co-arising is in Nagarjuna's Mula Majjhimaka Karika, and that is a Mahayana text, or at least it was adopted by the Mahayanists and rejected by the non-Mahayanists. And just in Theravada, paticca samuppada, or dependent co-arising, just got crystallized down into these 12 links, and you just memorize the 12 links, and that's supposedly it. And I really don't think so. I don't think that the Buddha himself taught the 12 links. So I do think that at least in Majjhimaka Buddhism, which is a branch of Mahayana, they do understand dependent co-arising better than Theravada. Like voidness or emptiness and dependent co-arising are like equated. They're the same. That is, everything is dependently co-arising is what Mahayana Buddhists mean when they say it's all empty, it's all void. And like no self would fit under that too, like, because it's just conditionally real. It's just sort of virtually real. So in Theravada, they do believe that there are these ultimate discrete realities. In Abhidhamma, there's this list of those 52 mental states that are ultimately real, 28 kinds of matter that are ultimately real. Consciousness and also nirvana is just fit into the same scheme as all this worldliness, nose sensitivity and maleness and just hardness, cohesiveness, and nirvana is just on the same list as all these other ones. So the Mahayana Buddhists got that one more correct than the Theravadins, in my opinion. To some degree, the Mahayanists did better in the idea of not adhering to morality and observances, because in Buddhism it pretty much crystallized down into the sets of precepts that you have to follow, and if you don't follow them correctly, then you have to take certain penances or do certain confessions and so forth. There was some of that in Mahayana also, but they were sort of cut a little more loose from the silken ropes of rules that you tie yourself with. Let's see. I mean, the one that Sio Vaksh and Sipat Zidana starts with, that holding no views, even the Mahayanists, they give it lip service at least, but of course they're still having views. So, and some of them might cling to those views, even, they have the idea, don't cling to any views, so they cling to the don't cling to any views, that kind of a thing. So those are just the ones off the top of my head that I can think of that Mahayana Buddhism may get more correct. Just the idea that this is all an illusion gets a lot more emphasis in Mahayana Buddhism. And I think Theravada did make the mistake of just reifying samsara and making it real. They admit that we don't interpret it correctly, but still there is this ultimate reality of all the atoms in the books on the shelf back there. Whereas in Mahayana, that's, it's like illusory. It's like conditionally real. It's conditioned and therefore just kind of virtually real, which I think is more correct. But I'll just move on to the next question. And we're getting there. We're almost done. This is the last questioner. And his name is Johannes, I believe. And Johannes says, it is taught that even a layperson who is an anagami or non-returner keeps the 10 precepts naturally and does not accept or use money. For example, the anagami Gatikara was without gems, gold, silver, or money, and made his living by taking earth that had eroded from the riverbank and making it into pots. These pots he left at the side of the road, and anyone who wished could leave a suitable amount of rice or food and take the pots. In this way, Gatikara supported himself and his blind parents. See the Gatikara Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. This demonstrates how money is an impediment to enlightenment and how the truly enlightened do not use money. The above quotes all prove that the acceptance of money by monks is not a small fault, and that it can render a monk incapable of attaining nibbana. Okay, this is just like the preamble to the questions. He's got some questions after this. Yeah, I think he's leaving out one of the just most golden quotes in the text, and that is, there's the canonical account of the Second Council in the Vinaya Chula, which is interesting reading. It's talking about how the first schism occurred in Buddhism, and you had some, Western monks who were strict in Vinaya, who visited like more easternward, where the monks had already started handling money, and he wouldn't take money. I mean, he was visiting this monastery and people were donating money, and then the monks were dividing up the money and they offered him his share and he refused to take it. So then they started getting on his case and they made him apologize to the lay people because he was like rude to them by not accepting their money. So what he did, he went to these lay people and he just started listing these texts in the suttas and so forth. And there's this one where the Buddha is supposedly saying that any monk who handles money or accepts money is as foolish as an animal. He's surrounded by darkness and he's enslaved by the chains of his own greed. And I mean, that is a canonical statement. I mean, the original, I don't know where it comes from. It might not be in the text, but the text in which he's quoting it is, I mean, that's canonical. So, yeah, definitely monks aren't supposed to handle money. For lay people, it's not so big of a deal. In fact, it's pretty much necessary. I mean, we can't all live like Gatikara, who also wouldn't even dig the ground. That's why he was taking the earth that he eroded from a riverbank, because it just falls off and it's just loose dirt, so he could just scoop it up with his hands and use that without having to dig the earth, because if you dig the earth you cut worms in half and so forth. So again though, I am skeptical of the whole 4 stages of sainthood theory that has developed in Theravada Buddhism. It's used in Mahayana also, although the Mahayana Buddhists have distorted it even farther. And like the whole idea of the anagami or non-returner, if you read the first suttas in the Iti Vuddhika, which is a Pali text in the Khuddaka Nikaya, it apparently is using anagami in the sense of an arahant. That an anagami or a non-returner is someone who's just not going to get reborn. They're enlightened, they're an arahant. And apparently it got corrupted or just mutated into a stage below arahant, one stage below arahant. So I'm fairly skeptical of any of these claims of anagamis or sotapannas or so forth. Yeah, I mean, you can read the sutta, the Gatikara Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya yourself and make your own conclusions, I suppose. But as the Buddha says in the Vinaya, I think it is, that if money is allowable, then sensual pleasures are allowable. But again, it's not the outward action that is morally good or bad. It is the mental states that accompany the physical action. And so I assume some people can handle money and not like conjure up any like unwholesome attachments or greed or whatever, and other people just can't. Even if they don't handle money, their mind is still all full of defilements. So I'll just start answering the questions. I'm just commenting on this preamble here. So the first question by Johannes is, Do you know of any other stories about lay anagamis in the Pali Canon? And I'm sure they're in there somewhere, but I've never been particularly interested in this sort of thing because I am skeptical about just the historicity of it. Um, and mainly I was studying it when I was a monk anyway, so I wasn't really interested in lay people. Although, there have been supposedly lay people that became fully enlightened, or at least non-Buddhist renunciants like Bahia, that's another one of my favorite suttas. That's in the Udana 110, the Bahia Sutta. Who he wasn't a Buddhist, but he became enlightened anyway. Of course, he got enlightened after hearing a very Zen-like sermon from the Buddha. Um, like Anathapindika was, I assume he wasn't an anagami, but if he was an anagami, he was filthy rich and an anagami, so he must have used money. He was at least a Sotapanna, and he was extremely wealthy. He had a wife too, although according to the commentarial tradition, they were celibate. They didn't have sex anymore. So, yeah, do I know of any other stories about lay anagamis in the Pali Canon? Not offhand. I do not recall. So I'll just move on to the next question. Just bearing all of that preamble stuff about how money is a spiritual impediment and so forth. He says, how is right livelihood even part of the Noble Eightfold Path then? It is more not doing something rather than doing right livelihood. Doesn't it just mean to not harm anyone with how you earn your living? How is this different from just the first 5 precepts, and why does it have a separate spot on the Noble Eightfold Path? Wouldn't a bum practice right livelihood consequently? In another sutta, the Buddha speaks about people staying away from activities like doing surgery on the eyes, ears, etc. as part of their sila. This sounds to me like even noble professions are ultimately an impediment to spiritual development, no matter how good your intentions might be. Are homeless people who just beg for money consequently doing more for their spiritual growth than people who try to earn an honest living to support their family? Okay, well, there's a number of questions in here, I assume. How is livelihood even part of the Noble Eightfold Path? Well, all of the Eightfold Path are essentially not doing something rather than doing something. All of the 5 precepts are not doing this, not doing that, not killing, not stealing, not sexual misconduct, not lying. It's all not. It's all just don't. So you can be perfectly moral by just sitting there doing nothing. With monks, right livelihood doesn't just mean, not causing harm so much as for a monk, right livelihood, to accept alms without following the rules correctly. If you're not a conscientious monk and you're accepting alms, that is wrong livelihood for a monk. So, it does go deeper for renunciants than it does for lay people. Right livelihood, it's just there are other ways that a monk doesn't do right livelihood, like not taking proper care of his requisites, like his robes and his bowl and so forth. Obviously, just like giving sermons in exchange for, I'll give this sermon at your Dharma hall if you donate to the building fund at the monastery, something like that. That would be wrong livelihood for a monk. But as a general rule, right livelihood is you're making a living in a way that is virtuous and doesn't cause harm. There's a list of wrong livelihoods, like dealing in weapons, dealing in poisons, dealing in animals for slaughter, dealing in slaves, which would also be like a pimp. Any kind of killing, which like being a soldier, for example, would be technically wrong livelihood according to ancient Indian Theravada Buddhism. But you have to have people like that, at least some people in some of those professions, just for a society to function properly. Let's see, how is this different from just the first 5 precepts? It's not entirely different, but it is for monks. Right livelihood does go a little deeper for monks. Wouldn't a bum practice right livelihood? Consequently, it depends on the bum. I mean, like a monk literally is a homeless person who, some of them, especially in ancient times, just wandered around homeless. So that aspect of being a bum might be beneficial if you have the associated beneficial mental states going too. Most bums, like hobos, do not, because most of them are alcoholics or nowadays on some kind of drugs. Let's see. This sounds to me like even noble professions are ultimately an impediment to spiritual development, no matter how good intentions there might be. Doing surgery on the eyes, ears, etc. Well, in the Buddhist time, doing surgery was a much cruder affair than nowadays. Let's see, are homeless people who just beg for money consequently doing more for their spiritual growth than people who try to earn an honest living to support their family? Again, it depends on the mental states. It's not just the outward actions or inactions, it's the mental states going on or not going on. And homeless people who just beg for money, some of them are spiritually oriented people, not many. Now, most of them are like drug addicts and mentally ill people and so forth. But yeah, some of them are renunciants. So again, it's I mean, the main point is it's not the outward action so much as the mental states associated with the outward action that determine the ethical quality of an act. So the last question by Johannes, and the last question of the evening. At last. Not that I'm complaining, it's good to ask questions, and you're welcome to ask questions. But this is the last one tonight. In the story of Gatikara, it is said that he experienced bliss, or piti, for 7 days straight after he learned the Buddha used some of his food and materials to support himself. Does this correlate with jhana in your opinion? It is said that an anagami is adept in concentration, and so consequently Gatikara would be expert in jhana practice, yet it is not mentioned that he explicitly meditated or practiced a specific technique. This sounds like formal meditation practice is not as important as life decisions and intentions to develop deep concentration. What are your thoughts on this? Well, just because he experienced bliss, or piti actually is not so much bliss, it's more like enthusiasm or exhilaration. You know, it's like pleasurable interest. I've had some writers have interpreted it as that. But I essentially here it just means he was like delighted for 7 days because he learned the Buddha used some of his food and materials, and I mean that's like mudita, or just like sympathetic joy, you know, like the feeling of happiness that grandma gets when the little kids are loving her banana bread. You know, the kids are liking it and she's just happy that they're liking it. You know, she's getting pleasure from their pleasure or happiness from their happiness. And you know, it's something along those lines. Or I mean, sometimes like Buddhist people in Asia are very devout. They've been trained since they were children that, you know, one of the best things a layperson can do is support monks. And when a monk, like especially a famous one with a high reputation for the strictness of his practice and his attainments and so forth, if he's actually accepts a robe or uses a fan or eats the food that the people offer to him, I mean, they can just be overjoyed. They just feel like they're blessed. So, I mean, it would be something along those lines. He just had like deep faith in the Sangha, in, you know, Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and he was just delighted that the Buddha himself used some of the stuff that he offered. I assume that would be my interpretation. So it's not the same as jhana. I mean, piti is one of the factors of jhana. You know, up until you get into the high jhana, you know, in the lower jhanas you experience piti, but once you get up to third jhana, then you're not experiencing piti anymore. I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that one. So let's see. Does this correlate with jhana in your opinion? It is said that an anagami is adept in concentration. But yeah, just because it is said that an anagami is adept in concentration doesn't even mean that. I mean, as I was suggesting earlier, anagamis It may be that originally it was a synonym for arahant, and then just the they the Indians, they love like systematic lists of things. I mean, they're just addicted to that, at least in ancient India, and they just came up with this scheme with all these qualities that and the different members of the hierarchy, have to have, like a Sotapanna can't tell a lie. Although most of the people that I have met that considered themselves to be Sotapannas, they would tell lies, at least to the extent of giving just bullshit confessions when they have to make confession. Where when you're making confession to another monk, you've broken some rule. At the end, the one you're making confession to says, in future you should restrain yourself, and then the monk says, yes sir, very good sir, I will restrain myself, and they have no intention at all. They just keep breaking the rule, and they're considered to be Aryas, at least in accordance with like the Mahasi tradition. So yeah, I mean, it's good to have a little bit of skepticism with regard to a lot of the stories about like exemplary saints, because some of them are just really over the top. Not that there haven't been over the top saints. There have been quite a few, even in modern times. But let's see, this sounds like formal meditation practice is not as important as life decisions and intentions to develop deep concentration. Or it's just your mental states, really. Your mental states are way more important than outward actions, as I keep saying over and over again. Let's see. This sounds like formal meditation practice is not as important. Well, I mean, some people have become enlightened without any meditation at all. At least not deliberate, systematic, formal meditation. It can just happen to you. If you're ripe, you've got good paramis. Maybe you've done a lot of meditation in past lives or something, so that you're just kind of ripe for it, and then just the right circumstance comes along and knocks the apple out of the tree, or whatever. So that's it. I hope I answered this question. I'm not entirely confident that I have answered all of these questions adequately, but I do my best. And if you have questions, you're very welcome to ask those questions in the comments below, or if you have access to my Subscribe Star channel, you can ask them there. If you have access to the Discord server, you can ask them there. There's a special Q&A room there. And just look at all the links below. If you haven't subscribed already, you're welcome to do so. Smash that like button, as people say, and be happy.